Good morning, everyone. I'm Jessica Brooks, the Educational Services Librarian at South Central Regional Library Council in Ithaca, New York. I hope everybody had a nice Memorial Day weekend. Welcome to the third webinar in the Practical Library Assessment Series from the NY3Rs Association. If you have any questions or comments during the talk today, please type them into the question area of your command module, and I'm going to be monitoring the questions and comments throughout the talk for our speakers today. And now I would like to introduce Mary Carol Lindblom, the Executive Director of SCRLC, and Mary Carol will introduce Bob Dugan.
Thanks, Jessica. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the NY3Rs Association, Inc., which is sponsoring this series, Practical Library Assessment, I welcome you. I was going to say just a minute ago that I hope that your Tuesday is as bright and sunny as ours is here in Ithaca, but our sun seems to have gone away, but it's nice and warm at any rate. As you may know, assessment and return on investment and their related components have been identified across New York State as a professional development need. Our data is not doing us justice, as a colleague who serves on our working group remarked recently. The series is intended to help you learn and adapt techniques to your local environment. We're also in process of developing a LibGuide or LibGuide containing tools, everything from links to resources to questions, survey questions perhaps, focus group questions, and eventually it may even include data sets. We'll send you the link out. We'll send it to everyone who has been in any of the webcasts in this series when the repository group is ready to unveil it. And certainly also stay tuned for more in the Practical Library Assessment series. The next one will be Susan Curry from Tompkins County Public Library, coming up June 11th on community engagement and assessment. And she'll be speaking at 2 o'clock that day. So to see everything we're doing, and whenever there is an update, we'll also include that on the website. Visit www.ny3rs.org, and then there you'll see a maroon New York State icon. Click on that, and then library assessment and return on investment will be a hot link down there. So today it is my pleasure to welcome Bob Dugan, and I'm not even going to take time to read his biography because you have that, or what he's going to talk about because you have that too. But he will be speaking on using data for peer benchmarking and best practices. So Bob, without further ado, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, and my appreciation to Jessica and her patience in terms of getting me up and running with the GoToWebinar platform, which is just wonderful, and to Mary Carol for the introduction. For those who don't know, the University of West Florida is in Pensacola, Florida, which is in the western part of Florida, and so far west that is in the central time zone. So we're kind of, we're actually a little bit more aligned with Chicago than we are with the eastern part of the state. On the slide, I've also given you my two email addresses. My personal Gmail is on the left, and then on the right-hand side is my official university email. I give you both because I just have to tell folks that when they communicate with me through the UWF edu email, that it becomes part of the public record of the state of Florida, which doesn't mean too much, but you might get, occasionally you might get emails about retirement and moving down to Florida, or how we can take over your businesses and stuff like that. So just to give you a heads up on that. We're going to go over benchmarking. We're also going to talk a bit about best practices from a practitioner point of view. And because that I know that this is a multi-type consortium, I'm going to look at both public libraries and academic libraries. So why don't we get moving on this? Let me make sure I'm on the right screen here. So just some context in terms of managing the data process. We collect data from a bunch of sources. So you've got your integrated library system, you've got tick marks at your desk, you've got gate counts maybe. And then what I do and what a lot of people do is to move the data or capture it, compile it into a usable structure. In my case, I use Excel. I have access to other tools, but for the time being, I'm using Excel and have been using Excel for about 20 plus years in its various formats in terms of electronic spreadsheet. And then what we can do is organize the compiled data. So I'm going to show you a screen of that. This is from my MIS, I call it Management Information System. All it is just, I'm going to get rid of this part of the screen. It is a spreadsheet, and what I do is I keep the most current 10 years in various on various tabs within the spreadsheet. So this is part of my section on expenditures, but it gives you an idea of how I approach this. And it is organized, or mine is organized, in order to help me fill out the numerous surveys that I get every year. ACRL, the former Academic Library Survey. We get survey requests from Peterson's U.S. News and World Report. And the intent of this particular MIS that I've set up is that I should be able to answer a question in 2 minutes or less. That's the objective. So this one here is on financial data. The next one is the same type of arrangement, but this time by staff. Student assistants, total FTE, that type of thing. And then you can see the red arrows here. Those are just, those are comments that I have in each of those cells in order to keep track of who's in them and that type of thing. But it's a very simple arrangement, and it works very, very well in terms of providing information for me. After you've got everything aligned, you know, in some sort of structure, then the next thing we usually do is calculate and report. We calculate sums, ratios. That's usually done through the spreadsheet, then report, usually through tables and charts and that type of thing. I'm just going to give you one example of a simple report that I do. This is actually in Excel. It's a fairly interesting report here for us, and I think my mouse is working. What the yellow line is where our databases are. The red line is where our print serial microforms is, and then our monographs are on, in ebooks are on the blue line. And you can see that from here, from an analysis point of view, we are still recovering on the monograph side from the low in FY 2012. But our print and e-serials are going down as individuals. That's because our databases are continuing to increase. But it gives you a visual way of talking to senior administrators about what's going on. And it's also something I can see, you know, just from an eyeball on this. So when we continue on the data process, there are two other things that we do after we've done the report, or the compile, report, calculate. One of them is to analyze. And what that means to me is, what does a data or measure mean? And a simple one example of analysis is benchmarking. And I'm going to take you through two benchmarking exercises today. We're going to go live in terms of a couple of benchmarks to show you what I mean by that. The other part is evaluate and assess. And from my perspective, that comes down to, what are you going to do about it to improve? So you've got all this data, you've got an analysis looking at this, and you go, what am I going to do about it? How am I going to improve this? Well, part of that is to identify best practices and who is doing what you want to do, and can you implement that practice locally. One of the great things about the library profession, and I've been at it for about 40 years, is that we share the best of what we do we share with others. We're always trying to help other libraries, and the idea of your consortia is one example of not only resource sharing, but also of improvement sharing within services, functions, and that type of thing. So that's one of the examples of assessment is how do you improve, and I use best practices as one of the means for that. So we're going to talk about some data sources here for just a minute. Public library data sources. There are two primary ones. There's a few out there, but I didn't bring in the Library Star Index. But to compare public libraries at MILS is probably one of the most visible. It's been around for a while. In fact, I worked on part of this particular data set back when I was a state librarian and a person working at a state library development agency back in 1988. So we've been looking at that for a while. And then the other one is the Public Library Data Service, PDLS, which is an annual survey conducted through the Public Library Association, and it's a voluntary survey. That one is referred to as ACRLMetrics. It's a subscription service. It comes out of, it's administered by Counting Opinions in Toronto, and it does yearly information. It's got Public Library Data Service information since FY 2002, and then access to MILS data since FY 2000. So it's been around for a little bit. Some of the benefits from this is that it's actually conducted by the Census Bureau for IMLS. There's about 9,000 public libraries included in this. The data is aggregated individually, or available individually, but also aggregated at state and national levels, which is really helpful when you're trying to make a point about where you sit within the within an aggregated example. The thing that I think is most important to me in terms of this is that the data has been reviewed and edited at the state and national levels, and it's been verified as correct by each state's data coordinator. That's a fairly significant and important role that's played for the public libraries at the state level. Very, very critical in terms of the data verification. And the tool right now it includes FY 2012 data from IMLS. On the academic data side, we've got the compared academic libraries, which is NCES, National Center for Education Statistics, which is IPEDS data, or which is IPEDS. The academic library survey went out of business. It ceased with the FY 2012 data, and then it has been reinstated as the academic library component through IPEDS, and that data set started just this past year. It includes FY 2014 data. It was part of the spring IPEDS collection, which ended April 8th. It's fairly interesting. We're following this very closely from the ACRL side, see how this thing goes. The other major survey that's out there, there's of course ARL. The other one that has more libraries in it is ACRLMetrics. You can think of it as sort of like a parallel to the public library side. ACRLMetrics is a subscription service. It's again administered through Counting Opinions. The difference on this is that the ACRL metric survey was actually the ARL survey up through FY 2014. In FY 2015 and beyond, it will be administered or designed and administered through the ACRL Trends and Statistics Editorial Board, which I am currently chair of, and Linda Miller from Cornell, who was participating in this webinar, is a future member of it starting in July of 2015, but has already made substantial contributions to both the survey instrument and the instructions, and has been real helpful in terms of us communicating changes that we need to IPEDS. Some of the benefits of ACRLMetrics, and because it comes from the editorial board, I have to rah-rah this thing, but it's actually good, and I'm going to show it to you. We're going to use it a couple times today. The data availability for access is really important. We're unsure right now when there's going to be FY 2014 IPEDS data that will be available for use. There will be no federal FY 2013 data. They never collected it. So the only FY 2013 data is going to be through ACRLMetrics, and we suspect that the reports are going to be available at least 18 months sooner than IPEDS will. And in fact, today we're going to use some 2014 data. You can create customized reports. You can use a subset of the data based upon locally selected measures and institutions, which is referred to as a filter. We're going to do one of those today. It will also combine ACRL, ALS, and IPEDS data. When you're creating a report, you can do some graphs, and then you can set up some templates, which are a feature of this particular set. So it's an interesting data source. Okay, so let's get into the meat of this thing. Best practices. Best practices is when you want to improve a process or a function, or you have an objective from your strategic plan you would like to reach. And there are a couple of best practices out there. One is a process, which is how long does it take to do something. So an example is how long does it take to shelve a book. That becomes something you can do in a time and motion study. So you may want to say, well, it takes me an hour, or it will take our staff an hour to shelve a double-sided 6-shelf cart of books. That's time and motion. Another is a best practice related to an objective, which is providing a certain set of number of programs or open a number of hours. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at best practices from meeting an objective point of view as opposed to a process. We're going to look at it from an objective. And the actual question that comes down about best practices is which libraries are meeting or exceeding your objective? Who is doing it better? And what you want to do is identify that so you can learn from them. So we're going to do a public library example first. One of the things that I've noticed from the strategic planning on the Public Library Association is that they are working with a role called the community gathering place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take us live through IMLS Compare, and we're going to use the West Florida Public Library, which is about 6 or 7 miles from here. It's a county-based library, and what we're going to do is I'm going to take you through how you can use IMLS in order to find libraries. So I'm going to hit Escape. I'm going to bring up IMLS, and this is the Compare Public Libraries data source from IMLS. You start off with the library name, so I'm just going to type in West Florida, and I hit Continue. It'll give me two options here for West Florida. One is the genealogy library. The other one, this is the actual county library here. So you click on it, hit Continue. And it gives you a couple of choices in terms of a comparison group. One is to compare similar libraries, or one is to choose specific public libraries for your comparison group. Because what we're trying to do is establish which libraries do a particular best practice, I'm going to choose similar libraries. Okay, so here are the variables that are available to me in general groups. What I'm looking at is when I think from my perspective, and I'm thinking about a community gathering place, I think about services per year. So you click on the button there on the plus sign, and up comes some of the variables that they do. So the first one I'm going to look at is library visits per capita. And the reason why is that I equate library visits per capita with a community gathering place. Now that may not be the right parallel, the right way to be thinking about it, but that's what comes to mind to me. I have two methods of looking for data. One is by within a range of library visits, plus or minus, based upon the value of my target library, which is West Florida, or to enter a number in both boxes. So at least, you know, maybe, I don't even know, at least 3 visits per capita, no more than 5 or something like that. But I'm going to take method 1, I'm going to default to the 20. Now you can change this. You can change it to 10, you can change it to 30, it doesn't matter what you want to put in. I'm going to let it default to 20 just because it will move a little bit faster when we do the search. So I hit continue, and that was pretty quick. So what I found is that I have 902 public libraries that would be comparable to West Florida based upon library visits per capita. I'm going to add, that's too many libraries to look at for a benchmark. So I'm going to add a variable, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to back to services, and this time I'm going to look at total program attendance per 1,000 population, because what that will do to me again is equate to the use of the library as a community gathering place. So I'm going to hit method 1 again, and I'm going to continue, and now I'm down to 47 public libraries. That's a lot better than 902. However, it may still be too many for you to look at in terms of a viable group. So I'm going to add one more variability to this, and what I'm going to do is go back to services, and this time I'm going to add circulation per capita, because it means that they're not only using the library, you know, for visits and for programs, but they're also taking things out. I'm going to hit method 1 again. I'm going to continue. Oh boy, I love the speed of this today. And the comparison group is actually 14 libraries. That I think is doable. So what you can do is just click this box, this link, see libraries in comparison group. And what it does is it brings up a window, and there are 14 in here. And what you can see is that they're kind of scattered. So there's a group there's a county library system in South Carolina, another one in Pennsylvania, Illinois, Minnesota, Missouri, Tennessee, Alabama, Texas, Michigan, California, another one in Pennsylvania, Vermont, Mississippi, and Montana. And these could very well help you look at what's going on in terms of other libraries that would be a best practice in terms of library visits and that type of thing. One of the things you can do is that you can export this to Excel so you can see, bring this back in, and that way there you're not losing it. You can also just print it out to your printer. Very, very convenient in terms of how to work this out. So let me go back to here. We've gone through a public, that's one other way of finding the best practice, and you can make adjustments. You can go 20%, 30%, you can go closer. I mean, you can restrict it. There's all sorts of things that you can do with this. So let me go to the next slide, and let's look at it from an academic library perspective as a best practice. And we're going to look at identify academic libraries that are open more hours than yours with a similar size staff. I get this all the time here at the University of West Florida. We are open 106.5 hours a week. We have a full-time staff of 36 and 8 full-time student assistants. So we have a total FTE of about 44. And students are always asking, why can't we be open more hours, that type of thing. And I look at this and I go, well, I'm pretty much stretched out as it is, but let me see if somebody else is doing better than we are. So this is where I look at it from a practitioner best practice. So this time we're going to go out to counting opinions, and I'm going to go to the ACRL metrics side. My ACRL metrics looks a little bit different than if you just have an ACRL metrics subscription, because I also use counting opinions for my continuous satisfaction survey. So I've got both the LibPath side and the LibSat side, but I just want to show you that there's a difference when I log on to it. But once I get to manage reports, oh no, it's going to say the same thing. Hold on a second while I get logged back in again. I must have timed out, sorry. Oh, just give me a second here. Okay, let me see if I can log in. Manage reports. And There we go. Okay, sorry for that. So this is where I work within ACRLMetrics and within LibPass. And you can see that I've got tabs here, UWF peers, aspirants, SACS, which is our regional accreditor, some IPED averages, UWF peers, report templates, and that type of thing. But this is what it looks like to me as I go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a report. And this is what the screen looks like. Now, I would generally take you through an exercise to show you how I make mistakes on this, but in order to save time, I'm just going to go right to it. One of the things that I know about hours is that ACRL has not collected hours per typical week for a couple of years. And the reason is that we started using the ARL survey, and the ARL survey does not include hours per week. We are reinstating that in the ACRL 2015 survey. So in the next survey that goes out, the tool will go out probably in August. We will again start to collect the number of hours a library, an academic library is open per week. So what I need to do is I need to collect a collection here, and you'll see that there's ACRL and there's NCES. I know that hours is in NCES, so I'm going to just click on the NCES. You'll notice that the period comes into 2012. I'm going to give this a report name just so they know what I'm doing here, and it's related to hours. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in best practices as a description as opposed to benchmarking. I'm going to just quickly save this report so that I don't lose it. Okay, so now I'm going to start looking for data. I clicked all groups, and remember what I'm looking for is library staff, and I'm looking for hours. So what I'm looking at here is library staff. It will come up, it's got the data elements that are here, and what I want to look at is total library FTE. I highlight that, and I click add, and it comes up, it's already into the set. The other one that I want to look at are services, because that's where hours are. Hours are in services underneath NCES. So here's typical week, and what I want to know is typical week, public hours, public service hours in a typical week. I click that, I hit add, and I've got my two data elements here that I'm going to be working on. Okay. One of the things I do know that if I ran this report, I'm going to save it, but if I ran this report right now, I would end up with about 4,000 libraries as a response. Far too many for me to figure out. This is where filtering comes in really handy, and the filters are over here. It allows me to do filter low and filter high. Okay. So I know that I have about 44 staff. Right here in 2012 it's telling me I had 43.27. What I'm looking at is that I want to hit a low of 44 because that's about where I am. So I'm going to put in 44 in the filter. I also know that I need to have a little bit of a range. Not that many libraries are going to have exactly the number of hours I have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it to filter high at 50. So don't give me any more results than those libraries that have between 44 and 50 FTE. The next filter I'm going to use is I'm going to put a filter low in terms of hours. I don't need to know all the hours that are out there that are equal to or less than me. I want to know who's above me. The other thing is that if I add just an hour to the 5 days that were open the longest, that will just be 5 additional hours. So what I'm going to do is set a filter low of 111. I'm just going to save this report. So what I'm looking for is to give me the libraries that the academic libraries that have a total staff of between 44 and 50 that have public service hours of 111 hours or more. It just happens to use 2012 because that's the last time that data for hours will be available until 2015, and now all I do is hit the run report. And there's the results. So here are the libraries. There are 12 of them in total that we've got. And when I look at this from eyeballing it, here's a library that has 111 hours, 44 staff, Pepperdine, and another one that has 111 hours, 45 staff, St. Cloud State University. What I would do is I would get a hold of these places and find out, what am I doing wrong? With the same amount of staff, they're open 5 hours a week more than I am. How are they doing it? What are they doing? We have a rule here that there always has to be a full-time staff person at any time in which the library is open. That may not be the case at either Pepperdine or St. Cloud. I need to verify that. One of the things that you can do is that it also graphs from this. So there's a graph. You can see that because I set the filter higher than what we had, you can see the number of staff there, and at the same time you can hit the filter to see the number of hours. So Wayne County Community College and Troy University are both open 168 hours a week, which is 24/7. That's great. I wish I could do that. The reality is I know that I can't. And then I can download this into an Excel spreadsheet. So that's the advantage of being able to do this kind of stuff. I can see 2 libraries that I need to get a hold of in order to find out what is the best practices in terms of this. Okay, so let me get back to, and I'm sorry I'm going so fast, but I've got...
One of our participants was excited to see Ithaca College in there.
Yeah, they're better than us. I may be giving them a phone call too. And you can see I didn't do that on purpose. Of course, I didn't know who was in the group, but that's okay. You guys are open more than I am. Okay, so that's how I approach best practices. Let's talk a little bit about benchmarking, Ithaca. Let's talk a little bit about that. In terms of benchmarking, is what you want to look at are similar libraries in order to see how you're stacking up against them. And it's not a competitive activity. A lot of people look at it like that, but it's a comparative technique. But what you want to do is to see how well you're doing against your peers or against maybe in terms of some libraries or aspirants. So we're going to look at this a little bit. From the public library point of view, I have found that most public libraries do not have a set of peer public libraries. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to find peer public libraries. So we're going to go back out, and I'm going to go over to the compare. This is our last setting. I'm going to start a new search just to clean things up. I'm going to go back to West Florida. And take the county library. And even though what I'm eventually going to be able to do is use specific libraries for your comparison group, because many do not have it, I'm going to show you how to set up a comparison group and do it by variable. So one of the things that happens on this, let me get back over to the sheet over here. One of the things that happens is that you want to look at organizational characteristics. So there's a few here that we can look at. The first one I'm going to look at is number of outlets. In other words, number of branch libraries. Again, I'm going to leave the 20%. I'm going to go to method 1. And when I do that, I come up with 247 libraries. You don't really want that many libraries when you're doing a comparison group because it will just drive you nuts. 247 is a lot. And if you all hear a rumbling in the background, it's because there's a thunderstorm going on at the same time while I'm talking here. So it's too many. I'm going to hit the variable again, and I'm going to go back to, because it's organizational characteristics, I'm going to go back to this. And one of the things I'm going to look at is the population of the legal service area. Which is what's defined here. It's about 300,000. So again, I'm going to do this. And so what I'm looking for here, what I'm looking at is that I want to set up a comparison group that actually has branch libraries. It's something in this county we're not a very large geographic county, but we're a very tall geographic county. We go from the beach on the Gulf all the way up about 75 miles away to the Alabama line to the north. So we've got I want something that's got branches because of our size, and also the service area because we are only about 300,000. So method one again, and what I come down to is I've got 21 libraries. That's pretty good. I mean, that may well be a really good group to set a comparison to use as benchmarks, and you know, it's kind of you. I'm going to put in another one just because I can, and because this is a lot of fun to do. And what I'm looking at is I'm going to look at full-time equivalent staff because, again, you're going to find that Escambia County, University of West Florida, the West Florida Public Library, Pensacola State College, we don't have a whole lot of staff here. So I want to make sure that my staffing levels are sort of equivalent. So I'm going to hit total staff per 1,000 population. Again, I'm going to keep the methodology at the default 20%. I'm going to continue, and what I end up with are 6 public libraries. That's pretty good. So I'm going to hit the comparison here, and up pops the window. And so these would be the starting group based upon those measures that I would use in order to start looking at a peer group. Now you may want to change, of course, the method one, change it to 10%. You may want to change it to 30%. You may want to add other factors. But I just wanted to show you that it's not that hard to do in order to find peer libraries based upon whatever metrics you're looking at, and that this group becomes then what you can look at in terms of all the other type of metrics, hours open, that type of thing. So this is one way for finding libraries in terms of your peers. And I'm going to close this out, and I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. And what I'm going to do is, that's a way of doing it from a public point of view. Academic libraries have a little bit different approach to benchmarking. For the most part, our institutions have already set up peers. In many cases, peers and aspirants. And we do that because a lot of the regional accreditors do. I think you guys are middle states. Down here, we're SACS, and SACS COC requires us to have peer and aspirant libraries and requires us to benchmark against those aspirants or those peers, and we have to do that on an annual basis. If you don't know who your peer or aspirants are, check your institutional research office. They know who they are. There's a list of them somewhere, and they've got the official list. Some of the benchmarks that I use and that I keep in order to make sure that I'm in SACS compliance are things like the percentage of expenditures. I refer to that internally as the triad. So what is the percentage spent on collection? What is this percentage spent on staff? And then what is the percentage spent on other expenditures? And I look at how I'm doing against my peer institutions with this. So I know, for example, that as low as I have FTE in terms of staff, I know that I spend one of the highest amounts in terms of percentage on staff than my peers do, which means that I am low on the percentage of funds that I spend on collection. So those are type of things that I can track through benchmarking against our peer institutions. I've got expenditures per enrolled full-time students. I've got material expenditures. I've got all sorts of staffing things I follow. I also look at instruction sessions. I look at Circ and Ref, and I look at ILL transactions per enrolled student. So those are just some of the metrics. I keep about 60 benchmarks going at a time. So let's go look at a benchmarking study. And I'm going to show you how to use a peer institutional filter on this, which is really one of the most powerful features of this particular stuff. And we're going to look at total expenditures and FTE staff in this particular exercise. Okay, so I go back over to I'm back at accounting opinions. I'm going to go back to report settings, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to do a new report. And if you notice right here is the hours one that we just did a little while ago. So I'm going to add. This time I am going to go and use ACRL data because I'm looking at expenditure data and I'm also looking at staff data, and that is going to be from FY 2014. IPED's data, they are just in the process now of starting to crunch the data. We're not going to see it until probably December 2015 or January 2016 at the earliest. I'm going to put on the name of this report is going to be expend and staff. I'm also going to call it, this is a benchmark study, so just so I tell the difference between benchmark and best practices. Okay, so I've got two things I know I'm looking for. So I'm going to, I've hit the groups, and I'm going to be looking at total expenditures and total library expenditures, which is a sum on the survey. So I'm going to highlight that. I'm going to add it, and then I'm going to go back to groups, and I'm looking at FTE. I'm going to be looking at staffing. I go down to personnel. I'm going to look at total staff, again, as a sum. I'm going to add that. Okay, so I got the two that I want to look at. Now, this is where the fun really begins in this. I want to only look at my peers. So when I click on locations, up come all of the folks. Let me get the expand. Here are all the libraries of the institutions in the survey tool, okay? That's great. There's all those guys, okay? But I don't want all these folks. All I want to do is compare against my peers. What you can do is that you can click on these and select institutions. Now, I've already done that. Sort of like, I feel like one of those cooking shows in which, you know, I'm telling you how to put together the pie, and I'm taking it to the stove and I pull one out that's already cooked. Well, I've already done that. So what I'm doing is I'm going to pull up my filter, which is UWF peers. And I just got to wait a second for this thing to set. Okay, so I want to check to make sure that I've actually just got my peers. I view the selection, and those are the institutional peers to the University of West Florida. They're all there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this to my report. And when it comes back on locations, you can see that it has populated out my peers. I'm going to save that. Now, when I also do peer benchmarking, I do two other options to this, and this is just, it's a personal choice, but it also gives me some pattern. I put in the average and I put in the median. I'm going to save that, and now I'm going to run the report. And here is the report based upon my peer and aspirants. And I mean my peer institutions. And what I can do is that here's the average and means just for that. What I can do is I can click on the graph and I can see where I am in comparison to these others with their expenditures. And I can go over here and see where I am in terms of my my staff. Now see, here's the difference on this is that in 2012 I was down towards the bottom. In 2014 I have now come up a couple, and that's because folks in Arkansas, Tennessee, and South Dakota are having more budget cuts than we are. But that gives you some idea of how this particular works. Then what you can do, again, is that you can bring it down into an Excel sheet. So let me get back to the PowerPoint. Let me go from here. And this is what a benchmark report looks like to me when I've taken it from the Excel sheet. I've added column headers, and then what I do is, this is Excel, folks, and then what I do is I just sort it. So in here, I've sorted it on total expenditures per enrolled FTE students, and there I am. What I do is I give this to the provost. This report goes as is, and I tell her that that the University of West Florida, in terms of expenditures per FTE student, is below average and below the median of our peer institutions. Okay, so that's one thing, that's one report that I do. Another report that I do, and I haven't done the 2014 report yet, I just haven't had a chance to get to it, but so this is last year's report. But this one is sorted on reference transactions with the peers. You'll notice that Indiana State University is missing. They did not participate last year in the ACRLMetrics. But here I can tell the provost, or the provost can see that in terms of reference transactions, we are above average and we are above median. However, one of the reasons why I put in the median and the average is that here we're below average and here we're below median. On reference transactions per enrolled students, we're above the average and we're above the median, and then for circulation per enrolled students, we are below average, but we are above the median. And when you have a provost who is metrics or numbered based and understands statistics, she understands what this all means. So that's why I do average and median in all the reports that I do related to numbers. Okay, so that's it from my end. If there are any questions, I think we got some time. I don't know what time it is. We've got some time, and if you got any epiphanies, I collect epiphanies. I love epiphanies. So comments, suggestions, questions, epiphanies, but it's your turn now.
Asha is asking, she's saying, I am not clear about the difference between benchmark and best practices. Could you clarify that?
Sure. Simplest way to look at it, with best practices, you're looking for a library who is doing things better than you, because what you want to do is improve your local practices. So for example, in my case, I was looking for libraries that are open more hours than I am. And see, none of those were my peers. So what I was looking for was who's open more hours, and then what I'll do is I will contact Pepperdine, and I think it was St. Cloud State University. I will get a hold of them and talk to them about how it is that they're able to do open 5 more hours a week than I am. They have a best practice that I am not replicating here. A benchmark is a comparison, and it's a comparison generally with just your peers. Now you can have benchmarking and other things. You can benchmark stuff, but in many cases, when you benchmark against who are not your peers, you're actually looking at best practices. So the simplest way that I explain it is that I look at non-peers. Although a peer might show up in best practices, I'm looking at everybody to find who's doing it better. And then when I look at benchmarking, I'm looking at my peers to see how I'm doing against who my university thinks are equals. I hope that explains it a bit.
Yeah, I think so. She says, got it, thanks.
You're welcome.
And are there any other questions for Bob? We'll give people a few minutes to see if there are any other questions.
If you have any questions, I'll try not to answer them in 1,000 words. I have a question for you all in terms of this. Was this helpful at all? I know that many people look at assessment and value, return on investment, which I run figures here all the time. I actually have a student return on investment along with an institutional return on investment. And I'm wondering, I use best practices and benchmarking all the time. I don't know if that's what you were expecting when you think about return on investment.
Chuck O'Brien says, thank you, Bob. Very refreshing and helpful. Carrie Mack says, absolutely helpful. Bonnie Nelson is asking, do you need a subscription to Counting Opinions in order to run these comparisons?
Yes. There's two parts to if you're talking about and let me talk about the academic library side from that, because that's the one I'm most familiar with. Yes, you need a subscription for the most current information, for the most current year. And a subscription, I think, institutional, something like around $150 or $200, I think that's what it is. I would encourage you all, though, to look at it from a consortial point of view because you'll get discounts doing this from a consortium. And last time I checked, Oberlin, the Oberlin Library Consortium, had become members of ACRLMetrics and had got a substantial discount in terms of this. Now, after a year, and we're still working, ACRL, the editorial board is still working this through with ACRL headquarters, Mary Ellen Davis and Mary Jane Petrosky, and with Counting Opinions. But what we're asking them to do is to make all that data available free at the end of the first year. So you would have access to 2013 data, but not 2014 data with the subscription. So that's what we've asked Counting Opinions to do. Counting Opinions right now, I think, has agreed to a 2-year rolling wall. What I've asked for is a 1-year rolling wall. But that's something you might want to look at in terms of a consortial subscription. And hi, Chuck.
Karen Wyckoff says it's good to see the info I have to come up with every year for ACRL being used for something, well, useful.
and if you have any questions about how to use metrics or whatever from ACRL, please do not hesitate to contact me. I helped put together ACRLMetrics from a book that we did back in 2009. Hernan Nateki, who is Hernan, who is now retired, Peter Hernan, who is retired from Simmons, and Danuta Nateki, who is the Dean of Libraries at Drexel. The three of us worked on a book that is designed to help libraries out with metrics. And then Counting Opinions took that and converted much of it into the ACRLMetrics. So we'd be glad to, I'm glad to help out with any questions related to library metrics.
Kathleen had said, very helpful and practical webinar, thank you. And Margot Gostina was multitasking. She says, yes, I had never used the analysis tools at IMLS, and I've been running reports on members the whole talk.
Great. that MILS tool is really wonderful, and the folks at IMLS do a great job in terms of that particular service. It's very, very good.
Patricia Hultz said, very helpful, and then she has a question. How do you create an institutional group filter?
Academic-wise, let me go back so that is part of Counting Opinions. Let me get this back up here. Let me go to report settings. So what you would do is, I've got a location here. What you can do is go to locations, And here are all of the institutions. So I suspect that your institution is here. So what you end up doing is just click on your peers. Okay? And then, like what I did, you just click on them, and then once you've clicked on what you want, give it a filter name down here. So I'm going to do test group, and then you save it. And then test group, I've got test group now in the filter. So let me go back to UWF peers, and I'll show you that there's my UWF peers. And then let me go back to, let me close that, and then let me go back on locations, bring this back up again, hit the filter, and let me bring up this test group that I saved. And when I view the selection, you will see that it added it to my UWF group. That's how you do it. That's all you need to do in terms of that. If you don't know who your peer institutions are, your institutional research office will know.
And Susanna Gal is asking, how do you advocate for resources using benchmarking if your peers' budgets are being cut?
I look at that as a trend, and there's two ways that I approach that. When I get to the 2014 data with the provost, I will tell her that we are making progress in terms of elevating ourselves in comparison with our peer group because we haven't been cut, and that those libraries, our peers who have been cut, are now, well, we were the bottom of the barrel. We're now no longer at the bottom of the barrel. So I can tell from our research, from the work that we've done in budgeting over the last 2 years, that it's working. So let's keep going with the working, and let's feel sorry for South Dakota in terms of this. But it obviously works in terms of making progress. And see, I've been giving her these reports now. This will be my 4th year giving her a report like this. So what I'll probably do, I haven't thought about this at this point, but that question's great. What I'll probably do is trend this over the last couple of years and show her how we have progressed up and these other places have not progressed, and that it's based upon her contribution to the library's budget that we are doing better than we were before, and we're making progress to hit the middle of our peer group. That's how I would bring it up. Actually, that's how I'm going to bring it up. That's a great question. I'm thinking, yes, yeah, I'm going to use that.
Tim Arnold would like to know how expensive ACRLMetrics is to subscribe to.
I think it's $200. It's like $200 a year as a license, as a subscription. I don't know off the top of my head if that's exactly right, but it's like $200. I will tell you the subscription that I have, which includes the not only the ACRLMetrics, but my continuous survey tool, is well over $6,000. But I use that in order to do our 24/7 satisfaction survey, and then ACRLMetrics becomes part of that cost. But I'm pretty sure that a standalone ACRLMetrics is somewhere around $200 a year. And again, I would encourage you all to think about doing this as a consortia. You don't have to. Every member does not have to participate in order to get a consortia rate. So I would suggest you all look at this from a consortia point of view and see about reducing the rate. Counting Opinions is pretty good at discounting in order to get more people using it.
Yes, as a consortial person, we will certainly look into that.
That's great. Like I said, Oberlin just did this back around March or April, and I think 60 of their 80 members became ACRLMetrics subscribers through the consortium.
Great, and Tim says thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I think that's all the questions we had. There was one more comment from Linda Miller who said, thanks for your enthusiastic and inclusive leadership, Bob.
Linda, I look forward to meeting you when we get to San Francisco, and you'll be hearing from me in the next couple of days about the ACRL survey. And actually, all of you in the academic field will be hearing about the new ACRL survey here shortly. We're about ready to release it for everybody to take a look at before we get to San Francisco ALA to finalize it.
Well, I wanted to thank you as well, Bob, for joining us, and thank you everybody who joined us today. And we're going to be sending out a follow-up survey for today's presentation, as well as a link to this recording. And I'd also like to invite everybody to join us for the next webinar in the series, which is Community Engagement and Assessment with Susan Curry on June 11th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time.
Yes, thanks everyone, and we hope to see you at future webinars. And thanks to you, Bob. Excellent presentation. Very helpful.
Great, and thank you all for your time, and like I said, if there's anything I can do, please feel free to get in touch with me.
All right, have a good day, everyone, and I will now end today's webinar.